Hi everyone, today we're going to talk a little bit of something that hopefully you're all familiar with it. If not, you'll have a chance to play around. Most of times in our videos we're either using a collaborative environment with notebooks with the interactive Python, or we're using the IDE. In this case here we're using PyCharm. But you will want to develop your projects using the standard input and output, and for that one should be able to run their programs through command lines. That specifically is helpful if you're developing your own scripts and you want to call your program, provide some parameters and stuff like that. Okay. It's somehow familiar with the logging video that we had previously, in which we'll create a separate class which will handle all the command line inputs, outputs, parameters that we might want to consider in our code execution. Okay, and for doing this, we're going to be working with this class called command line right here, and we'll take a look and see how it looks like. Just to think for now as a management class, and where we're going to load all the parameters and all the commands how we want our program to run. Okay, in this example we're going to be calling our Python script, providing an input folder, output folder, some numbers, and whatever flag we want to put as flag true or false. And to do this, we're collecting the information from our command line, which is the object that we're using from this class command line here. Okay, so let's take a quick look before we actually play around and run this in a console through a terminal. If you can run directly in your terminal if you want, but if you're using IDEs such as PyCharm, you can click here on terminal and you'll be able to run your code through a command line. Okay, so let's see how this class works. It's a small class, and you can use it as a default or as a base class for whatever parameters, arguments you want to use it. And for doing this, you want to include the library called argparse, and also the util class right here, which we'll talk in a little bit. So what is the idea with this class? In the constructor, we're going to initialize our object with all the information that we want to collect from our parsing our argument list. So as soon as we create our object right here, we're going to take all the information that we pass over the argument parser. And to do this, we're going to create this object parser, which it's going to execute the function command line parameters, which we'll talk about in a second. And that we're going to parse all the arguments that we defined in this specific function. And as you can see here, we're going to hold the input folder. We're going to collect the input f in f in this case from the arg parser. We're going to do the same thing for the output folder, for the flag switch and number. Okay, so as you probably notice, a main component of this class is the command line parameters function. You can give whatever name you want. It's basically the function that implements instantiate the object from the arg parse class, and we call the argument parser function there. So as you can see here, for each parameter, for each argument we want to work when you're calling your script, you should add a new argument. So let's take a look on them one by one. Well, first of all, we create this parser and we put it as a description. In this case, we're saying, well, this is the default command line for standard input and output. For each and every argument, as you can see here, for 1, 2, 3, for those 4 arguments, we're going to have 4 add arguments. And the meta information that we're going to fill up there, it's going to be the one that this specific argument it's going to be using. All right. So in the first case right here, the first positional argument, it's the flag that we want to use. It's kind of standard to use a long argument or a short one with one dash line and the letter from the first flag. In this case here, if we're using input, so dash dash input, and the short version of this is dash input. The information that we're going to store is the type of string. It could be an int, it could be a float or whatever. The action that we're going to do is we're going to store that, and the destination, that's an important parameter right here, important argument. The key destination for DEST, it has to hold the same name in which we're going to go there and retrieve from the parser into the variable that we're going to use in our programs, all right? So here, see that, for example, for the input folder, the inf is the same one as we have here for this input folder in the constructor. And as the meta variable, this is a path because we want to hold it a path, and we're going to mark this as a required. So every time we call our script, you should provide that variable, this argument, sorry. In this case here, the dash dash inputs and then the path, or the dash I and the path. And optional, you can include a help that explains in case you don't provide any information, we're going to have this message here like provide the desired input folder, okay? The output folder follows pretty much the same pattern as we had it before here. And as you can see, in this case right here, the OUF destination here is the same one where we are using the output folder, okay? Now let's take a look on the last two elements right here, which are the ones that change a little bit from the first two. The first one here is the flag. In this case, we are just using, as you see here, the second alias that we have, it doesn't necessarily need to be one letter, is a good practice though, but here we just use a different one just to show how it looks like. The type, this flag is going to be a string to Boolean. So the thing is, we're going to be using a Boolean value, but the way the arguments are passed, they're parsed as strings. So you have to transform the string where you're typing, in this case here, true or false, and it's going to be transformed as a Boolean. You could do the same thing up here in string to Boolean, so it doesn't make that much of a difference, but in any case, we also going to store the destination flag. If you pay attention, this string right here matches the name of the args that we're going to retrieve. This meta variable is a parameter, but now we are saying that this is not a required argument. So if we don't pass that information, our code should run smoothly without any trouble. Why? Because it's not required for our code. Since it's not required, it's usually a common practice to provide a default value for this. So in this case right here, we put this as a false, but we're saying, hey, as a default, this here is a false. So when we do args.flag, the false value, it's going to be placed there as a default value, all right? We also have our help message here, and in the help message, we already state that this is going to be the default false if you don't provide anything. But more than that, we specify which kind of choices do we have. So it's not like the user can type anything as the input and the output. In the flag, you can only type true or false, and that's it, okay? The last argument, it's somehow similar to the flag, but instead of working with booleans, we are working with integers. In this case, we don't need to parse directly a string into an int because we already cast this as an int. And then we also stored this until num, which is the same argument variable name that we have here, up here. And then in the choices, we provide a list of possible values. So we provide, it can be the value of 0, 1, and 42, and as you can see here, it's also a not required argument, and the default value is 42, okay? After we add all the arguments that we want to work with it, we go ahead and return the parser, which is going to be initialized in in our constructor right here. Okay, so let's take a look and see how this program runs. As we see here, when we execute our main program, we're going to create the command line object for the class with the same name, and then we're going to retrieve all those values and print just to see how they look like. All right. As I said, the idea of this standard input and output is to use the actual command line to do this. So you're going to go ahead and click on terminal. And then if you're using Windows, by default, this is going to prompt to you the bash here for you. Sorry, the bash, the command line from Windows, the command line. And then you can simply go ahead and say bash here. And now that's good, you have the bash here. Let's just clean here. And then, okay. So here, what we're going to do, we're going to call our program. And we're going to say, hey, call the program. And then what's the name of our program here? It's inside the Python command line. And then the name is CLI and then main. Okay. We didn't mention this. I think it's a good opportunity for us to check it out. There's the help option, which is already included in this. So if you go ahead and do -H, what we're going to see? We're going to see all those default values, the choices that we can have, the message, how the flag is with a shortcut and everything. So let's just open this here a little. So when we call our program with the help flag, notice that everything between the brackets right here, they were marked as the required false arguments. So number and flag, if you recall correctly, those are false as required. So they are between brackets right here. Input and output, they are required, so they are without the brackets. And then here we have the message that we define in our object, and here all the options that we can use it there. They are all marked as optional arguments. Don't pay attention too much on this. It's just because we're not working with grouping here. If you want to check it out more about grouping, you can check the links that we're going to provide, but here's just a simple case. All right. And as you can see here, we have all the information that we put it in our class command line, and then we know exactly what we have to do in order to call our program correctly. So let's go ahead and then provide some valid flags for us. So the input here, we're going to say that's folder input, why not? And then for the output, we're going to say that this is output. We're going to use the, by the way, you can mixture both flags, the short version and the long version. We're going to say that it's folder, output. Then we're going to do dummy, which is the dummy for flag. And then it's going to say it's true. And then we're going to go ahead and say the N1 is 42. Well, what are the values? I think 42 was a valid value. Yes, 42 is. Let's pass this one because it's also a valid value, right? So if you go ahead and run that, you see that all the arguments we collected, so the input folder is the folder /input, output folder /output, number 1, and then flag used 1. Why flag used 1? It's just because that's true. If we're false, it's marked as a 0. Okay. So let's say, for instance, we don't provide all the optional arguments, right? Let's see how it looks like. So if we don't provide the optional arguments as flag and number, as you can see here, they will get the default value that we had before. In this case, we hard-coded some default values, but we could simply left them as none and it would be all right. Okay. Now, if let's say now we are running with the whole thing, let's pass this value. Well, 42 is the actual value, so let's use 0 here, and then let's not provide the input and see how it looks like. Okay. And then if we try to run this, we're going to have an error and say, hey, the following argument here is required. In this case, you should use --input or -i for the input. Okay, so it's showing very clear here this is a required value. All right. Then you can simply exit out to the command line here and minimize this. So, of course, this is just a sample how to do command lines. We highly recommend you to do so, and you can combine the log class in which you the log example in which you provide the log file destination and file name to your command line, and then you can combine those two last tutorials in one single program. All right. There's also another way to work without the arg parse. It's called arg values, but we're going to put this as a link for you to take a look later. Okay, so thank you and happy coding.